Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you all for joining. Today we're going to be going into a little bit more detail about cnPilot and cnMaestro, our cloud managed platform for our Wi-Fi solutions, and specifically going into detail about our security features. And today I have Puneet with us that's going to be going into detail about that. So without further ado, Puneet, go right ahead.
Thanks, Ray. So we'll go over the security features of our cnPilot APs and cnMaestro network management solution. Just to quickly recap what cnPilot and cnMaestro are. cnPilot is Cambium's Wi-Fi access point series. This comprises 4 access points: the R200, R201, which is the home AP, the E400, the EPMP 1000 hotspot, and the upcoming E500, which are the enterprise access points. The E400 is for indoor enterprise installs. It's a dual radio 11 AC AP. The EPMP 1000 hotspot and the E500 are for outdoor installations. The EPMP 1000 hotspot is the same hardware as our existing EPMP 1000 product, but with the software upgrade, it starts to function as a Wi-Fi access point. The E500 is a new product which will be available from June, and this is a dual radio access point with 11 AC capability. All of these APs can be managed with cnMaestro. cnMaestro is our Wi-Fi controller as well as network manager, and the aim of cnMaestro is to provide lifecycle management of the devices, so everything from inventory to troubleshooting to AP management. cnMaestro is currently cloud-based, and we are also releasing a version that can run on premises or on your own server if you want to have it run locally instead of having it run on the cloud. The on-premises version is currently in beta. The cloud version is released and it's being actively used by customers. So when we look at security, one good way to look at Wi-Fi security is end-to-end, all the way from clients to access points to the actual system, the network management system. So we'll work through all of these layers as we go through this presentation, starting with the solution and the top level security of cnPilot and cnMaestro, so the network management layer itself. cnMaestro runs in as a cloud service, and it provides a number of security services to keep the data secure, as well as the connection between cnMaestro and the access points that it manages. And we'll go through some of what that does. And then when we look at the cnPilot access points themselves, the access points have a number of security features built in, both for keeping the configuration secure as well as for controlling the client traffic. And in terms of client security, all the packets that are sent from a wireless client to an AP are transmitted over the air and could potentially be sniffed by somebody with a packet sniffer or a packet capture tool. So the cnPilot APs also provide wireless security features, and we'll go through some of those. Many of them are standard based, some of them are extensions to that, and we'll go through all of them as we go through the slides. In terms of cnMaestro cloud security, we have security features built at every step of the way, as the cnMaestro provides configuration, control, and management of the access points. The only inbound access that we have into the cnMaestro is SSL based connection. All the equipment that it manages, they are identified by a serial number or by a Cambium ID. A Cambium ID is a password that the administrator can set on the AP, and that ensures that any device that you're adding to your account, the connection between the device and cnMaestro is authenticated. We also have a firewall in front of the cnMaestro service, which handles any form of distributed denial of service attack, any packet floods, things like that, to make sure that cnMaestro service can stay up and running and handle any attacks from the internet. All the user data that we keep that does not go through the data center, we have an architecture which is based on Amazon's cloud service, and that makes sure that all the data that we collect and save is also replicated and backed up. There is a continuous monitoring of the data centers. The data centers are also distributed across the world, so we have multiple data centers, and there's automated monitoring to make sure all the services are up and all the data that we collect is backed up and we have multiple redundant copies that are saved. The system is also maintained with all the continuous critical patches for various components that we use. So in terms of the kernel, in terms of any open source modules for maintaining the connection, we make sure all of those tools and all of those utilities are always up to date with all the security patches installed on them. In terms of the connection between cnMaestro and cnPilot, we use authentication as well as encryption on that link. So when the access points come up and they reach out to cloud.cambiumnetworks.com, they make sure that they are connecting over HTTPS. So this is the same technology that we use in the browser for connecting to, let's say, our bank or for checking our email. And all of these connections are encrypted based on AES. And the access point will validate the certificate of cloud.cambiumnetworks.com to make sure that we don't have somebody impersonating cnMaestro and trying to have the access point connect to them. We also use all standard ports and protocols. As I mentioned, we use HTTPS, so it's TCP port 443. Unlike management through SNMP, where we would have required the firewall to have special ports being opened for management, we don't need any changes to a typical customer's firewall. The access point is installed on site, and the access point will be able to connect through the firewall, assuming HTTPS is open, and be able to form a secure connection back to cnMaestro. Once the connection is formed, the access point will identify itself and be tied into the customer's into the administrator's account. This identification is done in two ways. We either have a serial number on the access point, and the serial number is not just a sequential number, it has a randomized component to it. So it makes guessing the serial number very difficult. So based on the serial number, you can tie an access point to your account so that when you log into cloud.cambium, your access point will automatically show up in your account. Or we also support another method which is a little more secure, but it requires logging onto the device, wherein you can configure what we call a Cambium ID, which is essentially a password on the access point, and then you configure the same password in your cnMaestro account. So now when the access point powers up and connects, it would connect to cnMaestro and form and be added to your account. In terms of AP security itself, the cnPilot Enterprise series of access point supports signed firmware images. These firmware images are also validated before the AP starts a firmware upgrade, so we make sure that we don't allow any accidental install of malicious firmware. All the configuration interfaces are authenticated and also when possible encrypted. So for example, if you are configuring the access point over its web UI, we support both HTTP and HTTPS. If you are configuring the access point over its command line interface, we support both Telnet and SSH. There is a username and a password on the access point, and the administrator can change the password to a stronger non-default password to make sure access is secure. For SNMP, we support both SNMP v2 and SNMP v3. All the interfaces from where we access configuration, we sanitize all the input that the user enters. So this will help prevent attacks with buffer overflows and things like that. The configuration file that the AP uses to save its configuration will encrypt all the sensitive information. So for example, your wireless security passwords, your administrator passwords, all of these are encrypted before they are saved. In terms of physical security, the APs also have a Kensington lock slot. So if you're installing the access point in a public location where you're worried that the access point itself might get stolen, you can also lock it down the way you would lock a laptop down with a Kensington lock and a chain. In terms of client security, the cnPilot APs support all the standard security mechanisms. This includes WPA2 pre-shared keys as well as WPA2 Enterprise. Both of them support AES-based encryption. The main difference between pre-shared keys and Enterprise is with pre-shared keys, you have to manually distribute the keys to all your clients. So if you have 50 users, you would need to give them all this password, and it's harder to revoke. So let's say you want to revoke access to one user who's now no longer going to be using this Wi-Fi, you would need to go to the other 49 and upgrade their passphrases as well. With the WPA2 Enterprise, we don't have this problem because all the usernames and passwords are saved on a Radius server. and the user can come in, log in, and get authenticated to the Radius server. It does require the need to have a Radius server on site. With the on-premises version of CN Maestro, this is something that we are planning to include within CN Maestro later this year. But currently, if you're using WPA2 Enterprise, you would need a separate Radius server. And this could be same as your corporate Radius server. So we have many enterprises where they're using a Windows Radius server for authenticating clients that are joining the domain or clients that are connecting over VPN. You can use the same Radius server for authenticating wireless clients as well. Starting from the 2.0 release, we also support 802.11 devloop. 11 devloop protects the management frames on Wi-Fi. So with WPA2, all the data traffic is now secure, but management frames are still going out in clear text, and there are some potential attacks that people can carry out to disrupt the connection between the AP and the client. And 11 devloop has measures in place to prevent that. Only newer devices and firmware will support 11 devloop. For instance, with Windows, this was part of Windows 8 and Windows 10. On our APs, as part of release 2.0, we now support 11 devloop. Another part of client security is controlling access, wherein you want to make sure, in addition to securing the connection itself to prevent eavesdropping, you also want to control who's connecting to your network. We touched upon WPA2 Enterprise, which uses a Radius server and username password to control this access. The cnPilot APs also support MAC authentication, where if it's a small enough network that you have the MAC addresses of all your devices, you can configure that on the AP. The MAC addresses can either be configured as a static list of all the MAC addresses saying allow access to the following MACs and then deny access to any other MAC address, or you can use a Radius server for centralized management. So you can have a Radius server where you have all the MAC addresses added, and then as people come in and leave the network, the cnPilot APs will look up the Radius server to authenticate the MAC address. Now, MAC addresses are easily spoofable. So MAC addresses by themselves are not a strong mechanism for security, but they can be used with other security mechanisms. So either with the WPA2 reshared keys, for instance, or along with a captive portal username password-based authentication. The next authentication method is a captive portal. So the cnPilot APs have the ability to redirect the user to a splash page. So if you go to a public hotspot and you try to access Google, you get redirected to the splash page typically of the local hotspot provider. cnPilot APs have that feature built in, and we can redirect the user to a local splash page and have a username and a password be entered by the user, and then we can look that up on a Radius server and authenticate the user. Starting the release in June, we are also going to support vouchers. So you can distribute tokens or vouchers to your users. And when a user logs in, only the users who enter the right voucher code will be allowed access to the network. So these are the mechanisms with which you can control which of your users are allowed access on the network. Once the user is on the network, we also want to control the data traffic from the user. cnPilot APs provide a number of features for that. One of them is DNS ACL. So we have an access control list where you can allow or deny access to particular domains. So let's say if you're a college or school environment, you may want to block access to YouTube or block access to Facebook. We also support standard enterprise ACLs. So you can block traffic based on IP addresses or based on port numbers. So for instance, if you wish to block services like SNMP or SMTP, that can be done by configuring an access control list. ACLs can be applied in either direction, either for traffic that is going out to the wireless or traffic that is coming in from the wireless, and this is enforced on the radio. We also have a firewall built into the APs which provides basic DOS protection. So it looks for IP spoofing attacks, large ping packets and so on, and would block those from the network automatically. cnPilot AP enterprise APs also support VLAN trunking. So this allows you to have, when you have multiple SSIDs, which will provide different service on the air. So let's say if this is an enterprise environment and you have one SSID for corporate users and one SSID for guest users, you can keep that traffic segregated on the wired side as well. So you can have two separate VLANs, and all your guest traffic can go on one VLAN and the corporate traffic can go on the other VLAN. And the amount of access that you allow can be different on those two VLANs. So for example, corporate users would be allowed access to the printers, to the other servers in the office, while all the guest traffic would typically be sent directly out to the internet. So with all of those services, we now have an idea of the end-to-end wireless security features that we provide. There are also some administration or management best practices that we recommend for users of cnPilot and cnMaestro. The first one is to change the default password of the device. Starting from release 3.0, the APs will also be generating a periodic alarm if the password has not been changed. We also recommend users disable all unneeded services. Now for many of the administration mechanisms, we support both encrypted as well as unencrypted mechanisms. So for example, if you're using command line interface, you have options of telnet and SSH. We would recommend disabling telnet, since although it is authenticated, it doesn't provide encryption. SSH on the other hand would be authenticated and encrypted. If you're not using SNMP, we would recommend turning that off. If you are using SNMP, we would recommend using SNMP v3. Another good best practice is to stay updated on newer firmware releases. So we have firmware releases going out periodically, which in addition to new features also include bug fixes and from the previous releases. So it's always a good idea to stay on the newer and updated firmware releases. Your cnMaestro account, the cloud management account and password is separate from the device login password. We recommend setting a strong password in your cnMaestro account as well. And then a periodic backup of configuration is always good. The configuration that is backed up from the devices is safe to keep on some other server because the passwords in it are encrypted. So even if you are copy pasting that, if you have somebody shoulder surfing behind or looking at that config file, they cannot read off the password directly. The config can be exported directly from the device or from cnMaestro. That's a good idea to keep a backup of the configuration somewhere. So that's pretty much it. This was an overview of the security features that we provide in cnPilot and cnMaestro, all the way from the cloud service, the connection between the cloud and the access point itself, and then security for client that are connecting to the AP, and for the kind of traffic that is being forwarded by the access point.
Fantastic, thank you. We do have a question that came in. Will the 802.11W be compatible with older and other devices and firmware by Cambium?
So it is compatible with other older clients out there. It is supported on all the enterprise Wi-Fi access points. So in addition to the E400 and the E500, it's also supported on the EPMP 1000 hotspot.
Fantastic, thank you. I recommend if anyone else has any questions, that please post them into the questions tab. We can address those as they come in. All right, Puneet, well, that's all we have. No more questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining. Puneet, thank you so much. I want to recommend that if anyone has any questions or has any ideas, please join our community and our forum, post those ideas. We are constantly having our product line managers and our engineers looking at that and answering questions and taking your guys' ideas in regards to products and any ideas that you guys have, as well as posting your stories onto Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and our YouTube page as well. So without further ado, Puneet, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for joining.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks, everyone.